My mom is a stripper, and everyone thought I will follow her path. Chapter 1. I was raised in a world where whispers followed me wherever I went. My mom, Lori, is a stripper, and though people in our neighborhood love to judge her, no one knows her heart like I do. She has shielded me from that life, fighting to give me a future beyond the shadows. I won't become what people expect of me. I won't be another version of her. I remember one night when I was 15, sitting with her at our tiny kitchen table. The flickering bulb above us made the room feel more fragile than it already was. "Sara," she said, her voice soft but strong, "don't you ever let them define you. They don't know me, and they sure as hell don't know you." "I know, Mom." I tried to smile, but the words of the kids at school still stung. "Stripper's daughter," they'd sneer as they walked by. Her eyes softened as she reached for my hand. "You're going to get out of here one day. You'll do something amazing with your life, and when you do, don't look back." I squeezed her hand. "I just wish people would see you the way I do." She chuckled, a bittersweet sound. "The world doesn't care about the real me, Sara. But you, sweetheart, you've got a chance to rewrite your story. And I'll be damned if I let anyone take that from you." At that moment, I swore I wouldn't let my life become a reflection of their judgments. I was determined to be someone else, someone more. But then there was Bryce. Bryce Montgomery. He was the first boy who ever saw me beyond the whispers. Or at least, that's what I thought. We met during high school, and for a while it felt like the world wasn't so harsh. He made me laugh, made me feel seen in ways I never thought possible. I fell hard, too hard. One evening, I sat next to him on the old playground near my house. The swings creaked as they swayed with the evening breeze, and I stared at him, my heart aching in the best way. "I feel like I could stay here with you forever," I confessed, feeling vulnerable. He smiled, but there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite place. "Yeah, me too." Weeks passed, and I thought we were something real until I heard the whispers again. But this time, they were louder, crueler. "You know it was a bet, right?" I overheard one of Bryce's friends saying in the hallway at school. "He only asked her out because we dared him. I can't believe she actually fell for it." My blood ran cold. Bryce caught my eye, but instead of denying it, he looked away. That's when I knew. The entire relationship had been a lie, a bet. Later that day, I confronted him in the school parking lot. "Tell me it isn't true, Bryce," I demanded, my voice shaking. "Please." He avoided my gaze, kicking at the gravel beneath his feet. "Sara, it's not like that," he muttered, running a hand through his hair. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." "So it's true," I whispered, feeling my heart break. "I was just a game to you." He finally looked at me, his face full of guilt. "It wasn't supposed to matter, but it mattered to me," I screamed, the tears falling freely now. I loved you." I turned and walked away, feeling the weight of every step. I couldn't go back to being that girl again, the girl who believed in fairy tales. I didn't even know who I was anymore. When I got home, I collapsed in front of my mom, the tears choking me. She knelt beside me, her hands smoothing back my hair. "I know, baby, I know," she whispered, holding me like she used to when I was little, and scraped my knee. "People can be cruel, but you're stronger than this. You're stronger than him." I wiped at my face, feeling hollow. "I don't feel strong, Mom. I feel stupid. I fell for everything." She lifted my chin, forcing me to meet her eyes. "You're not stupid, Sara. You've got the biggest heart of anyone I've ever known. Don't let him take that from you." Her words stuck with me, even when I felt like I had nothing left. The next day, she handed me a small envelope of money, everything she had saved. "You need to get out of here," she said, her voice firm. "Go to the city, find a decent job, and make a life for yourself. I'll be fine here, but you need to live, baby girl. You need to show the world who you really are." I stared at the envelope, tears filling my eyes again. "Mom, I can't leave you." She smiled, wiping at her own tears. "I'll be okay, Sara. I've done my part. Now it's your turn." And with that, I left the only world I'd ever known behind. Chapter 2. As I arrived in the city, my heart pounded with a mixture of fear and determination. I had barely enough money to last a week, so I knew I needed to find a job immediately. Walking down the streets, I eventually found myself standing at the entrance of an exclusive neighborhood. The large houses and manicured lawns seemed like a world away from where I had come from. I approached one of the security guards at the gate, nervously shifting my weight from foot to foot. "Excuse me," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you know if anyone around here is looking to hire help? I'm looking for a job, any kind of work, really." The guard looked me over, his expression a little skeptical, but before he could respond, a sleek black car rolled slowly toward the gate. As it passed, the window rolled down and an older man, dressed in a tailored suit, leaned out. He had an air of authority, but his eyes were kind. "Did I hear you right?" he asked, his deep voice calm but curious. "You're looking for a job?" I nodded quickly, unsure of who he was but sensing he might be my only chance. "Yes, sir. I'm willing to do anything, clean, cook, whatever's needed." The man glanced at the guard and then back at me, sizing me up for a moment. "As it happens, we do need help around the house. Our last maid just left, and my wife has been looking for someone new. If you're serious, you can come by the house later today for an interview." My heart leaped. I couldn't believe my luck. "Really? Thank you so much," I exclaimed, relief flooding through me. "Hold on," he added with a small smile. "Let's see if my wife feels the same way. Come by at 4 p.m. I'm Mr. Lucas, by the way." "Ask the guard to let you through." I thanked him again, my voice barely steady from the excitement and disbelief, and watched as the car drove away. The guard gave me a more respectful nod this time. "Looks like you got yourself a chance," the guard said, his tone softening. "Good luck." I smiled nervously. "Thank you. I'll be back at 4. Later that afternoon, I found myself standing in front of the Lucas mansion, nerves swirling in my stomach. The house was enormous, with elegant columns framing the entryway and large windows gleaming in the late afternoon sun. I knocked on the door and was greeted by Mrs. Lucas, a graceful woman in her early 50s, with soft eyes and a warm smile. "You must be Sara," she said kindly, her voice gentle. "My husband mentioned you'd be stopping by. Please come in." I stepped inside, immediately taken aback by the warmth of the home. Despite its size and grandeur, it felt inviting. "Thank you for seeing me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm really grateful for the opportunity." Mrs. Lucas led me to a sitting room, offering me tea before we began talking. "Tell me about yourself, Sara. How long have you been in the city?" "I just arrived today," I admitted, fiddling with the hem of my shirt. "I came to start over. I don't have much weight, but I'm determined to work hard." She listened carefully, her face thoughtful but compassionate. "And what sort of work have you done before?" I've cleaned houses before," I said, choosing my words carefully. I didn't want to get into my past, not now at least. "And I can cook too. I'm willing to do whatever you need." Mrs. Lucas smiled, a warm and genuine expression. "We can teach you the rest. You seem like a hard worker, Sara, and I appreciate that. Why don't you start tomorrow? We'll see how it goes. If it works out, you'll have a place here." I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was so used to people turning me away, looking down on me, but here she was, offering me a chance, just like that. "Thank you," I said, my voice cracking slightly. "I won't let you down." Mrs. Lucas smiled kindly and nodded. "I believe you won't, Sara. Welcome to our home." As I left the Lucas mansion that day, my heart felt lighter. I had no idea what lay ahead, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like things might actually turn around. I had a chance, a real chance, to start over, and I wasn't going to waste it. Chapter 3. The Lucas family quickly became like a second home to me. Mr. Lucas, with his calm demeanor, often praised my work ethic, while Mrs. Lucas treated me with a kind affection I hadn't expected. They were different from anyone I had met. Wealthy, but without the coldness I associated with the people who lived in big houses. They treated me like a person, not just a maid. In the evenings, when Mrs. Lucas wasn't busy, we would sit in the kitchen together. She'd share stories about her life, and in turn, she'd ask about mine. I always kept my past vague, not wanting to invite any pity or judgment, but she never pried, only listened with a warm smile. One evening, as we sat over tea, Mrs. Lucas looked at me thoughtfully. "You know, Sara," she said softly, "you remind me so much of Beatrice." I blinked in surprise. I had heard their daughter's name before, but they rarely spoke about her in detail. Beatrice had been away for as long as I had been working for them, off studying in Europe. The way they talked about her, it was clear she was the pride of the family, a bright, beautiful woman with everything ahead of her. "Really?" I asked, my voice uncertain. "In what way?" Mrs. Lucas smiled fondly. "Oh, not in looks. Beatrice is blonde like her father, but in spirit. You're determined, hardworking. Beatrice always had that fire in her, too. She never let anything stop her. But she paused, her eyes taking on a distant sadness. She can be a little intense sometimes. It's one of the reasons we sent her away to study, to help her grow. I nodded, unsure of what to say. The way Mrs. Lucas spoke about Beatrice was with love, but also caution, as if her daughter's strong will could sometimes be overwhelming. Anyway, she said, her smile returning, I've been meaning to talk to you about something. You're still so young, Sara. You shouldn't spend your life cleaning houses, not when you've got so much potential. I looked at her, surprised. What do you mean? Mrs. Lucas leaned forward, her voice encouraging. I mean you should continue your education. You're smart. I've seen it in the way you handle things around here. Have you ever thought about going back to school? There's a community college nearby. You could start with night classes. We'd be happy to support you, Sara. Her words caught me off guard. No one had ever spoken to me like that before, like I was worth investing in, like I could be more than just a housemaid. My mom always said I was smart, but hearing it from Mrs. Lucas planted a seed I hadn't realized was waiting to grow. I don't know if I can, I said hesitantly. School was never really an option for me. Nonsense, she said firmly. You can, and you should. The world has so much more to offer you. Don't limit yourself. I nodded, trying to absorb what she was saying. It was terrifying, the thought of going back to school after so long. But maybe, just maybe, she was right. Chapter 4. With the Lucas family's support and Mrs. Lucas's constant encouragement, I found myself walking through the doors of the local community college for the first time. I was nervous, clutching my books tightly as I stepped into a new world where I wasn't just the maid, but a student, a person chasing her future. It didn't take long before I met Daniel. I was sitting alone in the campus cafeteria one afternoon, staring blankly at my notebook, trying to make sense of my assignments. My mind was racing between tasks at work and the pressure of school. That's when Daniel approached, carrying his tray and giving me a friendly smile. Mind if I sit here? He asked, pointing to the empty seat in front of me. I looked up and nodded, relieved for the distraction. Sure, go ahead. Daniel sat down, glancing at the mess of notes and books scattered across the table. Looks like you're in deep, he commented, taking a sip of his coffee. I laughed nervously. You could say that. It's a lot to handle. Work, school, everything. He nodded, his expression softening in understanding. Tell me about it. I'm in the same boat. I work nights, study during the day. Sometimes it feels like I'm just treading water. His words struck a chord with me. Exactly. It's like you never get a moment to breathe. Yeah, Daniel said, chuckling. But at least we're not alone in it. Makes the struggle a little easier, right? That was how it started. Two overworked, under-rested students finding solace in each other's company. Daniel and I began studying together, grabbing coffee between classes, and talking about everything from school to life outside of it. We were different in many ways. Daniel was more confident, always quick with a joke to lighten the mood, while I tended to be more reserved, carrying the weight of my past. But despite our differences, we clicked. We understood each other's struggles in a way few others could. Both of us were working students, hustling to make ends meet while trying to carve out a better future. We leaned on each other, and before long, it felt like we had always been friends. College slowly became a place where I felt like I belonged. Instead of just being Sara, the maid, I was Sara, the student, someone with dreams and a future. Daniel became a constant presence in my life, and our friendship deepened with every shared moment of stress and triumph. We'd study late into the night, encouraging each other when the workload seemed overwhelming, sharing the exhaustion of balancing jobs and classes. One rainy afternoon, after a particularly grueling exam, we sat in the campus cafe, nursing cups of hot chocolate. Do you ever think about what's next? Daniel asked, staring out the window at the pouring rain. Like, after all this? I shrugged, stirring my drink absently. I try not to think that far ahead. Just getting through each day feels like a win sometimes. Yeah, he agreed, nodding. But still, it's kind of exciting, right? That we're actually doing it, pushing for something better. I smiled at him, appreciating his optimism. It is. It's hard, but I wouldn't trade it. For the first time in my life, I feel like I'm working towards something. Daniel looked at me then, his expression serious. You know, you're stronger than you give yourself credit for, Sara. Most people wouldn't have come this far. But you did. His words warmed me in a way I hadn't expected. I had always been hard on myself, always feeling like I wasn't enough. But with Daniel, it felt like maybe I was. Thanks, Daniel, I said softly. I'm just trying to keep going. Well, you're doing more than just going, he replied with a grin. You're winning. I laughed, feeling a rare sense of lightness as we sat there, watching the rain fall. In that moment, I realized that college had become more than just a place to study. It had become a place of hope, for me and for us. Chapter 5. Graduation day was a blur of emotions, pride, relief, and the overwhelming sense that my life was finally moving forward. After years of balancing work and studies, I had made it. And I wasn't just a maid anymore. I was someone with qualifications, someone with choices. That's when Mr. Lucas offered me a job as his secretary. Sara, he said one morning over breakfast, I've seen how hard you work, not just in our home but in your studies. You've grown so much, and I'd be honored if you'd consider working with me full-time as my secretary. I stared at him, momentarily stunned. Me? Your secretary? He smiled warmly, nodding. You're more than capable, and it's time you take the next step in your career. It'll give you more opportunities, and you know the company well enough. What do you say? I didn't even need time to think about it. Yes, of course, yes. It felt like my life was finally falling into place. Working as Mr. Lucas's secretary was a world away from scrubbing floors and tidying rooms. I had my own desk, an office space, and responsibilities that challenged me in a way I hadn't experienced before. But just as everything seemed to be settling into a new rhythm, Beatrice came back home. It was as if the air changed when she walked into the Lucas mansion. I hadn't seen her in person before, just pictures and stories from Mrs. Lucas. But now she was here, in the flesh. Tall, beautiful, with a presence that demanded attention. And she wasn't alone. Her fiancé, Edward, arrived shortly after, charming and polished, everything you'd expect from someone set to marry into the Lucas family. At first, Beatrice was distant but polite. She didn't pay much attention to me, focused instead on catching up with her parents and talking about wedding plans. But as time went on, I noticed a shift. She began to watch me, her gaze sharp and scrutinizing, especially whenever I was around her father. One evening, after I had handed Mr. Lucas some documents in his study, Beatrice approached me in the hallway. Her expression was cold, her eyes calculating. "You've gotten close to my family," she said, her voice laced with something I couldn't quite place. Jealousy, perhaps. Don't think I haven't noticed. I froze, unsure of what she was implying. "I'm just doing my job, Beatrice." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Just remember your place, Sara. You might have gotten out of that maid's uniform, but you're still not one of us." The words stung, but I forced myself to keep calm. "I'm not trying to be," I replied quietly, holding her gaze. She narrowed her eyes, stepping closer. "Good. Keep it that way." As the days went on, tension between us grew, even though I did my best to avoid unnecessary conflict. The situation worsened when Edward began paying more attention to me. At first, I brushed it off as casual conversation, small talk in the office, polite exchanges when our paths crossed. But soon, his compliments became more frequent, his glances lingering a little too long. One afternoon, while I was organizing files in the office, Edward walked in. He leaned against the doorway, his eyes fixed on me. "You know, Sara," he began, "you're different from the other women I've met in this world." I glanced up, confused. "What do you mean?" He smirked, stepping further into the room. "You're genuine, not like all the pretentious people I've had to deal with. It's refreshing." His words made me uncomfortable, but I forced a smile. "Thank you, Edward, but I really need to finish this work." Instead of leaving, he stepped closer, his voice lowering. "You deserve better than this. I could give you a different kind of life, you know." I froze. Was he really implying what I thought he was? Before I could respond, the door burst open and Beatrice stood there, her face pale with fury. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her eyes darting between me and Edward. "Nothing," I quickly said, stepping away from Edward. But Beatrice wasn't convinced. Her gaze hardened, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. "I knew it. I knew you couldn't be trusted." "Beatrice, it's not what you think," I pleaded, but she wasn't listening. From that moment on, Beatrice was convinced I had been trying to come between her and her fiancé. She accused me of having an affair with her father, of manipulating her family for my own gain. It didn't matter what I said. The more I tried to explain, the more her jealousy grew. Chapter 6. The tension between Beatrice and me grew like an unrelenting storm, each day amplifying the distance between us. She had returned home as if to reclaim her throne, and I felt like an imposter in a world that was supposed to be my sanctuary. Beatrice's icy demeanor didn't change, and I often caught her glaring at me from across the room during family dinners. It was unnerving, but I tried my best to focus on my work, reminding myself that I belonged here as much as anyone. However, the whispers in the house only seemed to grow louder. One evening, I was organizing files in Mr. Scott Lucas's office when Beatrice barged in. "Do you really think you can just waltz in here and take my place?" she snapped, crossing her arms defiantly. I looked up, startled by her sudden intrusion. "What are you talking about? I'm just doing my job." "Your job?" she scoffed. "You think that's all this is? My father respects you, and it's disgusting. I know your type. You're just waiting for your chance to seduce him." I stood, my heart racing with indignation. "I would never do that. Mr. Lucas is like a father to me." Beatrice's laughter was cold and sharp. "Save it. You might be playing the innocent maid, but I know what you really want." "Beatrice, you don't understand." "Don't I? You think you're so special, don't you? Just because you have his attention? Newsflash. He'll never see you as anything more than a maid. You're just a project to him." I felt my throat tighten at her words. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've been through." "Or maybe I do," she shot back. "I heard about your mother. Stripper, right? People like you don't belong in this world." Her words cut deep, echoing the cruel judgments I had fought against my entire life. "I'm not ashamed of my past," I said, my voice steady despite the hurt I felt. "But I'm not here to compete with you, Beatrice. I'm trying to build my own life." Her expression shifted slightly, the anger morphing into something softer. Fear, perhaps. "You have no idea what it's like to lose everything," she said quietly, her voice trembling with emotion. "Then help me understand," I said, my voice gentler. "What are you really afraid of?" The moment hung heavy between us, charged with unspoken feelings. Beatrice hesitated, her facade cracking just a little. "I'm afraid of losing my family, of losing my place in their lives," she admitted, her bravado faltering. "My whole life has been about living up to expectations. I can't let someone like you take that away from me." Before I could respond, the door swung open and Mr. Lucas walked in, oblivious to the tension that had just unfolded. Beatrice immediately regained her composure, her expression hardening again. "Ah, there you are, Sara," Mr. Lucas said, his warm smile easing the tension in the room. "Could you help me with these reports?" "Of course, Mr. Lucas," I replied, grateful for the interruption. As I stepped past Beatrice, I could feel her eyes burning into my back, a mix of jealousy and resentment swirling around us. I couldn't deny that I felt a flicker of sympathy for her. She wasn't just angry at me. She was afraid of losing everything she had always known. Days turned into weeks, and the conflict between Beatrice and me simmered beneath the surface. Every interaction felt charged, filled with unspoken words and hidden agendas. But what truly unsettled me was Edward's growing attention. He often sought me out during office hours, asking for advice on projects or simply engaging in small talk. I didn't want to encourage him, especially with Beatrice watching, but there was something easy and genuine about our conversations. One afternoon, as I was sorting through files, Edward leaned against my desk, a playful smile on his face. "You know, I really admire your work ethic. Not everyone can handle the pressure like you do." I smiled back, trying to keep things light. "Thank you, Edward. It's just part of the job." "But it's more than that," he continued, his gaze intent. "You're not just a secretary. You bring a unique perspective, and it's refreshing." I felt a warmth creep up my cheeks at the compliment. "I appreciate that, but I'm just doing my best to keep up." "Well, your best is impressive," he said, his tone softening. "Have you ever thought about pursuing a more significant role here?" I hesitated, torn between flattery and caution. "I'm happy with my position, really." "But you could do so much more. You deserve to be recognized for your talents." I met his gaze, sensing the underlying tension, but before I could respond, Beatrice walked in, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. "Edward, could you help me with something?" she said, her voice clipped, cutting through the moment like a knife. He nodded, but I could feel Beatrice's stare boring into me, the jealousy palpable. As they left, I leaned back in my chair, trying to shake off the unease that had settled in my chest. As the days passed, I began to see a change in Beatrice. The anger she had directed at me slowly shifted into a kind of resigned acceptance. She still kept her distance, but I caught glimpses of her vulnerability when she thought no one was watching. One evening, after a particularly long day, I found her sitting alone in the garden, the moonlight casting a soft glow around her. "Are you okay?" I asked cautiously, unsure of how to approach her. Beatrice looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "What do you care?" "I care about you. I don't want to see you sad. You are my boss's daughter. I am truly grateful for the opportunity that Mr. and Mrs. Lucas gave to me. If there's anything that's bothering you, just let me know. Is this because of me that you are sad?" I replied softly. Her defenses faltered as she sighed, staring down at the grass. "I just don't want to be replaced. I thought I had everything figured out, but now it feels like everything is changing." "You're not being replaced, Beatrice. Your parents love you, they're proud of you, and you can't let fear drive you to push people away," I said, hoping my words would resonate with her. She met my gaze, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "What if they like you more than me?" I shook my head, my heart aching for her. "They love you for who you are, just like they've grown to care about me. You don't have to compete with me." After a long pause, she nodded, her expression softening. "I guess. I just don't know how to be vulnerable." "Neither do I admitted, surprising myself. "But we can figure it out together." It was a fragile truce, but it was a start. I hoped we could rebuild some semblance of a sisterly bond despite our rocky beginning. Little did I know, the real test of our relationship was just around the corner, waiting to change everything we thought we knew. Then came the day Beatrice discovered my past. She had invited my mother to the office, her face twisted with a mixture of anger and triumph. In that moment, I realized that our fragile connection was about to be put to the ultimate test. Chapter 7. The company event was a disaster waiting to happen. Beatrice's plan to expose me felt like a twisted game, one I never wanted to be a part of. As my mother stepped into the venue wearing her usual bold confidence, I felt my heart drop. I could see the whispers ripple through the crowd, every head turning in our direction. "Look who decided to show up," Beatrice sneered, crossing her arms as she stood next to Edward. Her smile was a mask concealing the tempest brewing beneath. "Beatrice, this isn't the time," I started, but she cut me off. "Time for what? To keep hiding in the shadows? Or do you want to introduce your mother to everyone?" My mother, oblivious to the tension, walked towards us with a bright smile. "Sara, honey, I'm so proud of you. Look at this place. It's so fancy." Before I could respond, Mr. Lucas, who had been deep in conversation with Mrs. Lucas, caught sight of my mother. His eyes widened, and I could see the recognition dawning on him, like a light bulb flicking on in a dark room. "Laurie," he called out, his voice filled with disbelief. The room went silent, all eyes turning toward us. I felt a flush of heat creep up my neck as I realized the weight of his words. "Lucas," my mother exclaimed, her surprise genuine. "I didn't expect to see you here." Before I could process the moment, Mr. Lucas stepped forward, his expression a mix of shock and something deeper, longing, perhaps. "It's been so long. But I always hoped to find you," he said, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. Suddenly it felt like the ground shifted beneath my feet. I blinked rapidly, my heart racing as the pieces of a long-buried puzzle began to click into place. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mrs. Lucas, who had been watching the interaction with an unreadable expression, finally spoke up. "Laurie, you never told us you had a daughter. He's been searching for you ever since you left." It hit me like a tidal wave. My whole life, I had been searching for a family I never knew existed. The shock coursed through me, a mix of disbelief and overwhelming emotions. All this time, the family I worked for was my own, Beatrice's face twisted in anger, her eyes burning with a mixture of fury and betrayal. "You can't be serious," she shouted, turning to Mr. Lucas. "You're telling me she's—" "Beatrice, enough!" Mr. Lucas snapped, cutting her off. His attention was solely on me now, and I could feel the weight of his gaze as he took a step closer. "Sara, I didn't know you were my daughter until now." The revelation hung heavy in the air, and I could see the gears turning in Beatrice's mind. Her anger turned to rage, but deep down I knew it wasn't me she hated. It was the fear of losing what had always been hers. "How could you keep this from me?" Beatrice accused her father, her voice shaky but defiant. "You just let her waltz in here, and now everything is ruined." "I had no idea," Mr. Lucas replied, his tone calm but filled with pain. "I wanted to find you, Beatrice, but I also wanted to find Sara." Edward stood nearby, seemingly unfazed by the family drama unfolding. He glanced at me, concern evident in his eyes. "Sara, are you okay?" I shook my head, feeling the rush of emotions swirling inside me, confusion, anger, and a strange sense of belonging. I don't know," I stammered, my voice shaky. As the chaos unfolded, I found myself retreating from the spotlight, stepping into a quieter corner of the room. It was there that Daniel, my loyal friend, found me, his expression softening as he approached. "Sara," he said gently, "are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost." I let out a shaky breath, my hands trembling. "Daniel, everything's falling apart. My whole life, what I thought I knew, it's all changing." He reached out, placing a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to face this alone. I'm here for you." In that moment, I made a snap decision. "Can you do me a favor? Just for tonight, can you pretend to be my boyfriend? I need to keep Edward away from me." Daniel raised an eyebrow, surprise flickering across his face. "Sure, but you know I'm not the one you should be leaning on, right?" "I know," I replied, guilt creeping in. "But I can't deal with Beatrice and everything right now, and Edward's persistent." He nodded, a hint of a smile breaking through. "Okay then, I'm your boyfriend for the night." As we walked back into the fray of the event together, I could feel Daniel's presence beside me, grounding me. I noticed Edward watching us, his brow furrowing in confusion. For some reason, seeing his uncertainty gave me a small sense of satisfaction. The more I played along with the charade, the more comfortable I felt with Daniel by my side. Our fake relationship began to feel real, the laughter and playful banter easing my mind, if only for a moment. But as I caught Beatrice's piercing gaze from across the room, I knew this was just the beginning of a tumultuous journey. One that would test our newfound family bond, expose our hidden fears, and redefine what it meant to belong. Chapter 8. The days that followed the company event felt surreal. Everything had changed, yet nothing felt different at the same time. I still went to work for Mr. Lucas, still had Beatrice glaring at me from across the room, and still found solace in Daniel's friendship. But the air between Daniel and me crackled with unspoken tension, an electric undercurrent that neither of us knew how to address. We were stuck in this odd limbo, friends on the surface, but with deeper feelings simmering just beneath. I'd catch him looking at me during lunch breaks, his gaze lingering just a moment longer than it should, and I'd feel my heart race, torn between the desire to lean into those feelings and the fear of what it might cost us. One evening after work, I found myself at our usual coffee shop, a cozy little place with mismatched furniture and the comforting scent of freshly brewed coffee. Daniel was already there, seated at our favorite corner table, scrolling through his phone. "Hey, sorry I'm late," I said, sliding into the seat across from him. "Traffic was a nightmare." "No worries," he replied, looking up with a smile that made my heart flutter. "I saved you a piece of that chocolate cake you like." "Thanks, you're the best," I grinned, feeling a warmth spread through me as I took a bite. The rich flavor melted on my tongue, but it paled in comparison to the way Daniel's gaze seemed to ignite something inside me. We chatted about everything and nothing, laughing and joking, but the atmosphere had shifted. I could sense the weight of what remained unspoken between us, and it felt like a dam waiting to burst. After a particularly silly story I shared about my disastrous first day as a maid, the laughter died down and we fell into a comfortable silence. But it was heavy with something more, an anticipation that felt electric. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel said, breaking the quiet. He leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Of course," I replied, my heart racing at the seriousness in his tone. "Do you ever think about us?" His question hung in the air, charged with emotion. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding in my chest. "All the time. I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. But I didn't want to ruin what we have. He nodded, a flicker of relief crossing his face. Me too. I've been terrified to say anything because you mean so much to me. But pretending feels harder every day. I know, I said, my heart racing. There's this part of me that's so scared. What if we ruin everything? What if it changes us? Daniel reached across the table, his hand brushing against mine, sending shivers up my spine. But what if it doesn't? What if it makes us stronger? We can't keep hiding from this. His words hung in the air, and I felt the walls I had built around my heart begin to crumble. You're right, I said, my voice trembling slightly. I can't keep pretending anymore. He smiled, and it felt like the sun breaking through the clouds after a long storm. So, what do we do now? We take a leap of faith, I said, emboldened by the moment. Let's stop pretending and see where this goes. With that, everything shifted. The air felt lighter, and the tension between us snapped into something new, something exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Daniel leaned closer, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes, the hope flickering just beneath the surface. Sara, he murmured, his voice low and husky, I've wanted to kiss you for so long. My heart raced, and I nodded, a smile breaking across my face. Then do it. In an instant, he closed the gap between us, his lips brushing against mine with a gentle hesitance that quickly melted into a warmth I'd never experienced before. It was everything I had imagined and more, a promise of what was to come, filled with the kind of passion that made the world fade away. When we finally pulled away, breathless and wide-eyed, I couldn't help but laugh. So we're really doing this? Yeah, he said, his eyes sparkling with mischief. We are. As we sat there hand in hand, I realized that everything felt right for the first time in a long while. My past didn't define me, and neither did Beatrice's jealousy or Edward's persistent pursuit. What mattered was this moment, this connection I had with Daniel, a bond that had grown from friendship into something beautiful and real. I leaned back in my chair, a smile stretching across my face. I'm so glad we finally admitted it. I was afraid I'd lost my chance. Never, he replied, his thumb gently stroking the back of my hand. This is just the beginning for us. And as I looked into his eyes, I knew he was right. We were on the precipice of something new and exciting, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead together. Little did I know the road ahead would be more complicated than I could have ever imagined, filled with secrets, jealousy, and the bonds of family that would test the very core of who I was. But for now, in this moment, I felt alive. Chapter 9, moving out of the Lucas house felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. My mom and I settled into a small apartment not far from the city center. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours, a place where we could breathe and rebuild. As we unpacked boxes and arranged our new home, I felt a sense of determination growing within me. This was a fresh start, and I was ready to embrace it. I wanted to focus on my education, my job, and on finding a path that was truly mine. A few days after settling in, I received a call from Beatrice. My heart raced at the thought of hearing from her. I had seen glimpses of her life online, filled with glamorous parties and happy moments. But I also knew the truth, the chaos that lay beneath her perfectly curated facade. Hey, Sara, she said hesitantly when I picked up. Can we talk? Sure, I replied, bracing myself. What's up? I know we haven't been on the best lately, she began, her voice shaky. But I need to talk to you about Edward. I held my breath, waiting for the bombshell to drop. Okay. He's been cheating on me, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I found out last night. I'm done with him. I felt a strange mix of emotions, sympathy for Beatrice, relief that I wasn't the only one who had seen through Edward's charm. I'm so sorry, Beatrice. I know how much you loved him. I thought he was the one, she continued, a tremor in her voice. But he lied to me, just like he lied to you. I should have trusted you when you told me he was trouble. There was a long silence between us, and I could hear the pain in her voice. I had never imagined that she would reach out to me like this, especially after everything that had happened. Beatrice, I said slowly, I'm not angry anymore. I understand that we both made mistakes, and I never wanted to come between you and your family. I was so scared of losing my father's approval, she admitted, her voice breaking. When I saw you with him, I panicked. I thought you were taking everything away from me, and I couldn't stand it. but I realize now that we're sisters, half-sisters, and I was wrong to treat you like a rival." Her words struck a chord within me. It was true, deep down I had always wanted to see us as sisters, not enemies. "I forgive you, Beatrice," I said softly. "It wasn't easy, but I see where you were coming from. I want us to have a fresh start, too." "Really?" she asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "Yeah, we've both been through a lot. I think it's time we put the past behind us." "I'd like that," she said, relief flooding her voice. "Can we meet up? I'd love to catch up." "Absolutely. How about this weekend?" "Perfect. I can't wait to see you." As I hung up the phone, a mixture of emotions surged through me. I never thought Beatrice would come around, let alone ask for forgiveness. Maybe there was a chance for us to build a relationship after everything we had been through. Chapter 10. When the weekend arrived, I felt a nervous excitement buzzing in my stomach. I hadn't seen Beatrice since the company event, and while I knew we were ready to start fresh, a part of me still felt apprehensive. We agreed to meet at a cozy cafe in the city. When I walked in, Beatrice was already there, sitting at a table in the corner. Her hair was down, cascading over her shoulders, and she wore a simple yet stylish outfit that suited her perfectly. She looked both nervous and hopeful. "Hey," I said, approaching her with a smile. "Hey," she replied, her voice soft but warm. We exchanged awkward smiles before I slid into the chair across from her. We both took a moment, looking at each other as if trying to figure out where to start. "So how have you been?" I finally asked, breaking the silence. "Honestly, it's been rough," Beatrice admitted. "I thought I had everything figured out. Edward and I had plans, a future. But now—" She trailed off, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I get it," I said gently. "I've been through my share of ups and downs too, but I'm learning that those things don't define us." She nodded, and for a moment we were silent, each lost in our thoughts. "Can I tell you something?" Beatrice asked, leaning in closer. "Of course." "I didn't just want to be Mr. Lucas's daughter," she confessed. "I wanted to be perfect for everyone, including you. When you came into the picture, I felt threatened, but now I realize I was wrong." "Beatrice, you don't have to be perfect," I said earnestly. "You're allowed to be yourself. We can support each other instead of competing. That's what sisters do, right?" She smiled softly, and it felt like a barrier had been lifted. "You're right. I don't want to compete with you. I want to be there for you, especially after everything." We continued to talk, sharing our hopes, dreams, and fears, and as the conversation flowed, I felt a sense of warmth blossoming between us. The bitterness of the past began to fade, replaced by something new, an understanding that we were both flawed, both trying to navigate this complicated world. "I'd like us to be close, Sara," Beatrice said, a genuine smile breaking through. "Can we start over?" "Definitely," I replied, grinning back at her. "Let's take it one step at a time." As we finished our coffee and shared a piece of cake, I realized how much I had missed this connection. This moment felt like a new beginning, a step toward building a sisterhood that I had always longed for. Chapter 11. With our newfound bond, Beatrice and I began to spend more time together, both as sisters and friends. She opened up about her experiences abroad, the pressures of being the perfect daughter, and her dreams of pursuing a career in fashion design. In return, I shared my journey, from working as a maid to becoming Mr. Lucas's secretary, and how I had navigated the challenges of being a working student. Beatrice listened intently, and I felt her support and encouragement lift me higher. One day, while we were going through some old family photos at the Lucas house, where I still visited occasionally, Beatrice suddenly paused, staring at a picture of a younger Mr. Lucas with a beautiful woman who looked strikingly familiar. "Who is this?" she asked, frowning. "That looks like my mom," I said, squinting at the photo, "but I'm not sure when this was taken." Beatrice tilted her head, deep in thought. "I've never seen this photo before, but it's strange. My dad never mentioned anything about her. I wonder why." My heart raced at the thought of my mom being connected to the Lucas family in a deeper way than I had known. "Maybe there's more to our family history than we realize," I suggested, curiosity igniting inside me. "Let's ask my dad," her voice filled with determination. "I want to know the truth." We made our way to Mr. Lucas's office, knocking gently before entering. He looked up from his desk, surprised to see us together. "Hey, girls," "What's going on?" he asked, a smile breaking across his face. "Dad, we found this photo," Beatrice said, holding it up. "Can you tell us about it?" Mr. Lucas's expression shifted as he examined the picture. "I haven't seen this in years," he said quietly. "That was taken before your mother and I got married. The woman in that photo, her name was Lori." My heart raced as I processed his words. "Lori? My mom's name is Lori," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "She was my first love," he admitted, his eyes distant as he recalled the past. "We lost touch when I got married to your mother. She and I had a complicated history, but I always hoped to find her again. And now, here you are, sitting in my office as my long-lost daughter." The revelation hung in the air, and I felt the weight of the moment settle around us. Beatrice looked between us, her expression a mix of confusion and understanding. "Does Mom know?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Yes," Mr. Lucas replied, his voice heavy. "I always tell her everything, and she accepts it." I nodded, feeling a swirl of emotions, excitement, confusion, and an unexpected warmth. It felt surreal to learn that the family I had come to work for and grow to love was tied to my own history. Epilogue. With Edward gone, the clouds that had loomed over our lives began to dissipate, allowing sunlight to break through. Beatrice and I slowly built a bond that felt effortless, a relationship that transformed our past grievances into shared laughter and support. We often met for brunch, swapped stories about our lives, and celebrated each other's victories. It was as if a door had opened, leading us into a world filled with understanding and sisterhood that I had always craved. Daniel was my rock throughout this transformation. Our relationship blossomed from the pretense of a fake romance to a genuine connection rooted in trust and shared experiences. We spent weekends exploring the city, taking long walks, and enjoying cozy movie nights filled with laughter and warmth. Each day brought us closer, and I found comfort in the idea that I was no longer just a maid or Mr. Lucas's daughter. I was Sara, and I was loved. One evening, as the sun began to set, I stood in our small but cozy living room, my heart swelling with gratitude. My mom was in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner, her eyes sparkling with happiness. It was a sight I never took for granted. She had been through so much, and seeing her smile felt like a victory in itself. As I glanced around the room, memories flooded my mind, every challenge we faced, every tear shed, and every moment of doubt. Yet here we were, standing tall, ready to embrace whatever the future held. When I looked back at Beatrice, who was scrolling through her phone while sitting on the couch, I felt a surge of warmth. We had made it through the chaos, and now we were sisters in every sense of the word. "I can't believe how far we've come," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. Beatrice looked up, her eyes bright with understanding. "I know. I never imagined we would be this close after everything. It feels right." "It does," I agreed, smiling at her. "I'm so grateful we found our way to each other." Just then, Daniel walked in, a playful grin on his face. "What are you two scheming about?" "Nothing, just plotting world domination," Beatrice teased, rolling her eyes. "Ah, I see. Well, I hope I get a good seat when that happens," Daniel said, chuckling. I stepped closer to him, leaning into his warmth. "You'll always have the best seat, Daniel." As the evening wore on, we gathered around the dining table for dinner, sharing stories, laughter, and dreams for the future. I watched as my mom and Beatrice exchanged glances, their newfound bond evident. In that moment, I realized that family wasn't solely defined by blood. It was built on love, forgiveness, and the willingness to embrace one another. My heart swelled with gratitude for the journey we had taken together and the relationships we had forged. And as I stood there, surrounded by the people I loved most, I felt an overwhelming sense of peace. I had finally found my place in the world, not just as a daughter, a maid, or a friend, but as Sara, the woman I was always meant to be. With every challenge behind us, I looked forward to a future filled with possibilities, knowing that no matter what lay ahead, we would face it together, stronger and more united than ever before. The end. If you're enjoying the love stories here on True Hearts Presents, don't forget to subscribe. By subscribing, you'll never miss an update, and you'll be the first to know when we drop new romantic tales that will sweep you off your feet. Hit that notification bell too, so you'll get alerted whenever we post fresh content. Let's keep this journey of love going together. Subscribe now and stay tuned for more heartfelt stories.